This is 140 Night Lords. Am I painting them all in this episode? No! YouTube doesn't allow snuff films. But I will show you my paint recipe. Welcome, traveler. My name is Blake Rea, and this is Love, Death, and Dice. Painting my Horus Heresy Night Lord army has been slow going. It doesn't help that I keep adding units every other week. I just can't get enough of these edgy freaks. Rather than making you all wait the months this will take to finish, I'm gonna grab a few of the key models and walk you through the scheme I'm using to paint the whole army. I am genuinely having so much fun going slow and cherishing each model. This army is my love letter to the books that got me back into the world of 40K, and it just doesn't feel right to rush through all that joy just for a video. I won't leave you hanging, though. This project starts with the humble spray can. Outside, hit the entire model with Army Painter's deep blue spray. Then, at 90-degree angles from the front and rear, hit it with Vallejo magic blue spray. We want to avoid hitting the sides of the model because this will serve as the shadow parts of the armor. If you want to reinforce this highlighting, thin down some Prussian blue and airbrush the sides of the legs, underneath the arms, chest, back, and the lower part of the power pack. Depending on the pose of the model, the magic blue spray might not have hit the front or back of some of the legs. Use some magic blue air and dial these areas in with an airbrush. This is also good for fixing any Prussian overspray that will inevitably happen. Quick side note, I am so happy to have finally used Prussian blue in a project. It's not only featured prominently in Zenithal's horror paintings, but more eerily, people have derived cyanide gas from the pigment. It's a paint with a lethal history, and who more fitting to tie that to than the Night Lords? After cleaning out my airbrush and making my sink look absolutely stunning, I got some sponge, a pair of tweezers, and a big dab of sky blue. After getting most of the excess off, I hit every major edge of the model, as well as the larger flat panels. This will emphasize hard edges and start our weathering. Next, use coal black and base all of the areas that aren't the armor. Things like the undersuit, power cables, holsters, weapons, and shoulder pads. This will help our metallics pop and give a neutral base for other colors. Optionally, you could just paint the metallic areas with this black and then just base the other areas in whatever color you want to use. This just runs the risk of that color kind of chipping away and revealing blue underneath. You would think this repetitive painting would be a chore, but I quite liked it. I want to go for a nice worn leather. To base those areas, I used dark umber. This is really quick, just the holsters, but you could do the tassels on the Terminators for a different scheme. Using the same dark umber and a very fine brush, start adding dots, chips, and scratches inside and slightly above some of the blue chips from earlier. We do this above because the light is catching the rim of each dent, selling three-dimensionality. Next, let's start working on those reds, which are slightly different depending on the model. Using burnt red, I hit the wings of the shoulder icon, Terminator eyes, and the bolter casings. My army has a 20-man strong tactical squad. Painting the bolters red while everybody else's weapons are black helps them stand out. This makes them a dark mirror to the early Ultramarines art, which I like a lot. You could also use this red to paint some of their hands because they're Nick Cave fans and crimes. Using red oxide, I hit the shoulder tassels of the Terminators and the loincloth of the leading Tartaros. The banner is trickier. It's going to be a focal point, so it deserves a little extra love to make that flat surface interesting. To start, I based the whole thing in dark plum. Next, I got some plastic wrap and covered everything except the banner. Using bold Pyro red, I created a Zenithal with my airbrush. The end result is a striking gradient over the whole banner. Just look at those lush shadows. The bone elements on these models need to look aged. To start it, I hit the mask, shoulder icons, and skull trophies with drab brown. Covers beautifully and has a great desaturated tone for our shadows. I only have it on one model, but pale skin might be a common hurdle for your army. I'm not the best of faces, but how I started mine was a warm titanium white and then a very thinned down Druichi violet wash, letting it pool in the forehead creases and eye sockets. I'm not going to paint the eyes though. I have a trick for that later. The last bit of color blocking we need to do is our metallics, which will be dictated by rank. I used dark silver for the universal things like vents, claws, chains, grenades, and certain weapon trim. Lower rank troops will also get a dark silver shoulder pad, while the higher ranking troops like captains and terminators will use rusty gold for their shoulder pad and the various trim. I also hit the Volkite weapon magazines, grenade pins, and banner ornamentation with this gold. At a glance, this distinction of metallics will help you identify who is important and who is not. Be really selective with that gold. It is easy to go overboard with it and make the whole army look more regal than they should. It's here that I like to do my first round of cleanup, fixing areas I might have missed or painted over. If you need to touch up the armor, I recommend using the Game Air version of Magic Blue. It weirdly better matches the spray can than the game color version. With everything looking clean, I can dive into bringing the model to life with washes, highlights, and effects. Grab yourself some Rattling Grime contrast paint and heavily dilute this with water. Apply this mixture to all of the metallics. Make sure not to let it pool in flat areas by wicking it back up with a clean brush. While that dries, let's grab our drab brown again and run a highlight over all of our leather areas to create a worn, dusty look to the leather. I hate golden leather, I much prefer the desaturated look. Next, use bold Pyro Red to highlight the bolters and wing icons. I drew a thin line at the topmost ridges of each wing to simulate catching light. The bolter was just a simple edge highlight and dragging the brush on top of all of the little knobs and mechanics lining the body. To highlight the bone elements, I used ivory, hitting the center of the skull icon, trying to sell a roundness to it. And then on the face, I hit the entire front of it and the edges of the ears, leaving the rest as the drab brown. I debated painting the ears red, but I like this elongated bone face. It's very ghoulish and creepy. By the time you are done with these highlights, the Rattling Grime should be dried and we can jump on our metallics again. To highlight the silver trim, use Vallejo aluminum. Dot your studs, line edges, and don't be afraid to create some scratches along the larger panels. Next, we do the same thing on all of the gold elements with old gold. It's here that you make a very important decision for your Night Lords. Lightning bolts or not? I chose no, because I don't like the look of them, but this is where you would add them if you wanted them. I do another round of cleanup, which is much shorter this time, and after that, I can dive into decals. I hate decals, they're a pain to work with. If I could go back, I would put a 3D printed shoulder pad on everything, but I didn't. So here we go. Cut out the decal and toss it in some water. Add a little microset to the areas you'll be applying the decal. Lift the decal, and hope to God it doesn't fold on you. Fuck. Lay the decal on the moistened area, and after it eventually gets aligned, add another thin layer of microset over all of it. Let that dry for about 30 minutes, and then lay on some microsole to work out the creases. It'll still be glossy after all of this, but we'll knock it back with some varnish later. Decals always put me in a bad mood, but you know what puts me in a fantastic mood? Adding names to my hobby toolbox. Thank you, Nuz, and all of the other souls for joining my Patreon. If you want to support the channel, consider following the link below. I'm going to paint a Night Lord's Thunderhawk at 500 patrons, so help me out. The armor panels and the deeper recesses could use more definition from one another. To do this, we'll pin wash with Tamiya dark brown right from the pot. Hit the panel lines underneath the chest, the panel connections on the power pack, and the armor studs. The pin wash will inevitably create tide marks. To fix this, simply wipe it away with a makeup sponge and white spirits. I highly recommend doing this panel lining outside or in a well-ventilated area. I only did a handful of models and my headache sucked. One of the unique benefits of building and painting Night Lords in 30K is that even though Horus Heresy is a historical game with very regal aesthetics, Night Lords are not regal. They are gutter trash, they are gangers, and they've been brutal long before the year 40K. This gives you the freedom to be more grimdark, and I'm going to take full advantage of that in my weathering stage. Take some streaking grime and heavily thin it with white spirits. Using a fat brush, run it all over the model. This will serve as a grime filter that darkens the bright armor without completely caking it. If you want a heavier grime as we did with the tanks, skip the pin wash and spray the whole model down with a thick layer of streaking grime, wiping away the effect later to taste. Weathering the metallic areas is a little different. In the past, I've used Dirty Down Rust and Verdigris, but I wanted to try something with a little more consistency on this project. For the silver areas, I'm applying bright rust deposits right from the bottle, targeting crevices and areas that don't see friction, like the bayonet connections, power pack vents, and a few of the studs. For the gold areas, I thinned down light turquoise and used it as a wash in much the same manner as the rust. Both of these effects are intense, but the oil and enamel nature of the paint allows us to dial it back to the level we want using white spirits. It's a careful balance, especially with the turquoise. It's easy for it to be too loud on the model. Once you're happy with the effect, take a break and let it dry overnight. Maybe play some well-deserved Space Marine 2. After a night of rest, let's jump on those Volkite weapons. My army features a lot of weaponry, too much to feature in one video, so let's talk about my favorite. Using thinned Tamiya flat white, airbrush the hot areas of the weapon. If you're feeling fancy, spray some of this white on nearby armor panels to show glow. Next, thin down some transparent orange and hit all of this white. This is the main color of the glow, but we'll need to add hotter and cooler areas to create contrast. Using black brown, hit the top areas of the coils to create burns. Next, thin down some golden yellow paint and apply it to the bottom recesses of the coils. It's important to not get this on the coils themselves because this is a glow from within. To tie this all back together, lightly hit it with the original transparent orange, and you're done. I'm still learning to do this effect, so play around with it and see what ways you can change it or improve it. Next, clean out your airbrush and load up some super matte varnish. Cover the whole model with this to dial back the decal gloss and protect the model for games. If you have a lot of models, you can use a spray varnish. This will just leave behind more grit that a macro lens can see. Something to consider if you're photographing them, like me. All those sharp blades need a glossy coat of blood to be at home. Luckily, I've been working on a new recipe. Using a toothbrush and blood for the blood god, flick the paint onto the blades. Don't be afraid to run the bristles along them to create streaks and globs. This looks especially rad on the claws. If you're feeling spicy and want to pay tribute to the cult of the bleeding eyes, use a flat brush and apply this blood effect in a streak from the bottom of the eyes, spilling onto the chest plate. Push and pull the streak with a wet brush to dial in an organic look. I tend to like simple bases for my armies. Maybe I'll get a little wet and wild with Conrad Kerrs and my HQs, but for now, a simple city rubble base is enough for me. Before I add my basing mixture, I painted the floor with coal black. In case the rubble falls off anywhere, you'll see black. Once that dries, cover the whole floor with basing glue. Spread it around evenly, and then dip it into grimdark city rubble from Geek Gaming Scenics. Let that dry, and then using a pipette, add some droplets of scenic sealant to lock everything in. If you got a little overzealous with your glue, use a toothpick or the back of a hobby knife to clean the rubble off of the feet. After one more drying session, pull out a pigment powder of your choice. I like Old Rust because it contrasts the blue above, and dab it onto the base and feet. Blow away the excess, paint the rim black, and that's a finished Night Lord. This paint scheme is clearly a long one. I enjoy that. That's what I want out of this creative endeavor. You might not, though. So, in the description below, I've written up a speed painting recipe that is just like a condensed version of what you've seen here. Give it a read if you have a deadline to meet or just want to get a bunch of painting done. Before you go, I will say this. It's okay to slow down and enjoy things. So much of our hobby is just rushing through a project to make it in time for our next purchase. It doesn't always need to be that way. Until next time, subscribe, and Ave Dominus Nox. You gotta stay clean. I think I got it.